Welcome to the first panel of the day. This is the Clean Mining panel. Now, before we get going, I think we should do a little introductions. Sitting to my immediate left, we have Cory McPhee, the Vice President of Corporate Affairs and Communications and Sustainability with Vale. Next to him, we have Carl Weatherell, the Executive Director and CEO of the Canada Mining and Innovation Council. Further on down, we have Nathan Stubina, who is the Managing Director of Innovation with McEwen Mining. Next to him, we have Jason Goodhand, VP of Business Development at Ezinc. And last, but certainly not least, we have Raziel Zisman, the co-founder and partner of Sustainable Governance with Whittle Consulting. Before we get things going, I think it might be useful to kind of define what we mean by clean mining. So I'll start with you, Cory, and maybe just kind of go down. What does clean mining mean to you?
Clean mining for me is actually about just being better. We have I work for a company that has a 100-year-plus legacy, and so we have to accept responsibility and act responsibly, and it's about securing our social license to operate today, but also into the future. And so there are ways that we can do things better, and I think we have to, as an industry, challenge ourselves to do things better. I don't separate clean mining from an environmental sense with all the other things that are required for us to have success into the future. I look at productivity, efficiency, safety. All of these things are part of what's required for us to challenge ourselves to do better on a continuous basis. And I think that clean mining, if you look at it purely in the environmental lens, we can reduce our emissions tomorrow to zero by shutting down the operation. That's not the intent of this. We really want to be sustainable, and sustainability covers so much more than just the natural environment. So that's the lens through which we look at it.
Mm-hmm. Carl, would you like to build on that perhaps?
Yeah, and I also like to build on something that George had said, and actually the forum last year, and that is the relationship to humanity. We talk a lot about, and especially last year it came up, the first question of the panel was, why does everybody hate us? Jay and George talks about humanity and the fit with humanity, and what we do is mining tends to talk to mining, with mining, for mining, about mining, so we have to look at this clean question from humanity's perspective, not ours. So the first thing I would do is redefine it from clean mining to clean resources. Because if you talk to people outside our industry, you say mining, they think of just the extraction side, whether you're underground or in the surface. So it's clean resources, and that also expands, it makes sure that we're not alone. It's not just about the mining industry, it's about resources in general, and it connects us to the rest of the economy in Canada. So that's number one, redefine it to clean resources. Number two is, if you take a look at the three of the top issues in humanity today, facing the globe today, it happens to relate to water. Water security, water cleanliness, water availability, et cetera, energy efficiency, sustainability, access, security as well, and our impact on the environment, so footprint. So three of the top issues facing humanity today are energy, water, environmental footprint. So can mining and can resources, clean resources, connect to those three things? And the answer is actually really simple. Cory's already talked about some of that. Key issues in mining today are energy, whether it's energy efficiency, energy availability, energy platforms. Same thing with water. Water is a big issue, and so is our impact on the environment. We produce tailings, we produce waste rock. Our impact is getting bigger, it's not getting smaller, or it tends to get bigger, not smaller. So the question then becomes, there's actually a relationship between mining and water, energy, environmental footprint as integrators from exploration all the way through to environmental footprint, to environmental management. But what do we need to do, or what's the focus, and what do we need to do with respect to the clean resource question? If you take a look at municipalities, for example, or even the Apple statement, no more mining, zero, right? Municipalities are focused on zero waste, right? So why can we not look at, in the mining industry, we waste a lot of energy. 35 to 50% of the energy that goes into a mine site is lost as low-grade waste heat. What if we got rid of that? Zero energy waste. We throw a lot of stuff out in the environment, whether it's tailings or whether it's waste rock. Zero environmental footprint. And the third thing is water. What if we did not discharge water at sometimes levels greater than the naturally occurring environment because of regulations? So to us, and I say us, not me, to us, the answer is clean resources is about towards zero waste industry, focus on energy, water, environmental footprint.
Absolutely, and I'm glad you took it there because that's quite a lot to unpack. But before we get to that, let's move on to Nathan.
I'll define it by what it's not. Whatever we're doing now is what I would consider not clean mining. If you have a strip ratio of 6:1 like we do in Mexico, you're moving 6 million grams of waste to get 1 gram per ton. So you're moving 7 million tons of material to get 1 gram of gold, and you recover 60% of that, which makes sense to no one except maybe the people in this room here. If you're putting it into a truck that's 30% efficient, burning diesel, and the weight of the truck is twice the weight of the ore, and you're going around and around the pit because you're stuck with a 5% slope design, and you're feeding that into a ball mill that's 5% efficient, and if Carl just mentioned energy, imagine that, you're feeding a ball mill that's 5% efficient. Energy is not free, we're complaining there's no energy, we're not on the grid, and yet we're flying diesel up to the high Arctic. Again, that makes no sense to anyone except maybe people in this room. And then you take that and you put it into a tailings dam. Over the last 30 years, 60 tailings dams that I know of have given way. So every 6 months, you're going to see in the news some tailings dams. So from the water, the energy, the waste that we're doing, I would not consider any of that clean or efficient or sane.
Mm-hmm. Now, Jason, you come from a bit of a different background than some of these guys, so I'm sure you'll have a pretty unique take on this question. I'm curious to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, I'm certainly not an expert on mining. I'm from the energy sector. And when I thought about clean, I obviously thought about environmental emissions, but defining that problem, a lot of when you think of clean, it's what are you leaving behind? What kind of mess are you making? And the topic of energy, this industry is powered on diesel and fossil fuels, and what you're leaving behind is a lot of carbon dioxide, which we can see is changing our climate. So one of the things I think we need to look at is how do we use less electricity and how do we use more clean technologies? You don't have to use fossil fuels to create electricity. We see that renewable resources like solar and wind are available at reasonable costs today and don't create emissions. But there are going to be technologies like microgrids and energy storage that are going to allow that to try and fully displace some of those emissions.
Definitely. Raziel, moving on to you.
Yeah, I like to turn it around. Let me ask, can we become a world leader in clean technologies? Question number one. Number two, who has imposed that question on us? Are we a clean industry? Is it because we're worried about social license, because we're ashamed of what we do? And let me tell a historical anecdote, because I've loved the two presentations earlier this morning and the two important comments that were made. George Hemingway put that slide of the year 1500, 1750, and the year 2000. Let's push ourselves 250 years ahead. And let me tell you the anecdote about mining and the Industrial Revolution. The primary driver for the steam engine was the coal industry, which desperately needed to dewater mines, and there was no way of doing it with horses moving around a pump. James Watt, using technology generated during the Napoleonic Wars to bore cannons, created his engine. And that industry revolutionized the world because that brought forward the railroad and so on. Can we be a driver towards making this world a better world, a cleaner world? And what Anthony Vaccaro mentioned, data that I wasn't aware of, we spend more on R&D than other industries. So let's look at it that way and maybe direct our answers to that. We should and ought to be leaders, and that'll take care of other worries we have about how other people perceive us or define us. There's no question we do things wrong, but also people who do not know the industry, they don't understand how hard we drive or we try to get things done better.
I think there's a lot of wisdom in there. Now, we have a latecomer to the party, John Mullally, the VP of Corporate Affairs at Goldcorp. Same question posed to you.
I didn't catch the question.
The question was, how do we define clean mining?
I'm just kidding. Yeah, thanks very much, and sorry for popping in late. I think just from Goldcorp's perspective, what I would say is that, as Nathan says, I think we know that we're not currently sort of adopting or necessarily executing on a clean mining vision. And so I think, and we sort of are also, we have a consensus here as well in terms of where those showstoppers, to use George's term, to where those exactly are. So maybe, just in terms of Goldcorp's perspective, kinds of things that we're doing to tackle that and to accelerate. One thing that I would say is that we're conscious of commercializing clean technologies when they're available. So, and/or supporting their commercialization. So I think that's critical, is that there's lots of things that are out there that are not necessarily being adopted. And though I think adoption still takes some risk taking, so that's Goldcorp's focus. The other thing is accelerating innovation, and you would have heard about our Disrupt Mining event at PDAC, along the margins of PDAC, which is really focused on giving entrepreneurs an opportunity, SMEs, to integrate and work around big mining companies. And this is often something that hasn't happened in the past. So it's about hearing new ideas, those very disruptive ones, the ones that will address the showstoppers like water use, fresh water consumption, energy and climate, productivity, and all those other major challenges. And then, I think the other big part is doing this in partnership. So I think what I would say about Disrupt Mining is that it's really become a forum, and even beyond that, it's become an incubator. So it's about bringing all the actors together. Goldcorp doesn't see that we have ownership over this event, because there are lots of other companies that have also been interested in some of the participants and some of the winners. So that's just a little bit about our perspective on clean mining.
Definitely, definitely. Now, I think it's worth taking a bit of a temperature check on mining as a whole in terms of how we're doing, right? If you were to ask the average 25-year-old how it's doing in terms of clean mining, they might not be the most informed, but they probably wouldn't have very nice things to say. So let's ask the experts. How do you guys think we're doing? Raziel, I think I'll start with you.
I have a 16-year-old son whom I quiz about mining, what he knows. Mostly he doesn't care. It's irrelevant. We should care very much about that, what that generation thinks of us, because they'll be our bosses a few years down the road. I run a mining company that has operations in Colombia, where I see firsthand the impact of mining, well done and poorly done. And there's a huge dichotomy. First of all, most people just don't know what large mining companies do in detail. They don't understand the science behind mining. But as pointed out by the panel, we commit enormous errors regularly that grab attention around the world. So I don't know what the answer is, but certainly the answer is not for us to act defensively. We need to proactively say, mention the challenges we have, and let people know how we're trying to solve it. There's no simple solution, because as one phrase I use, people love to hate us. Mm-hmm. But everybody loves to use, nobody flies on wooden aircraft. And even if they flew on wooden aircraft, what would you cut the wood with? So, it's, and as I travel, I'm asked the question all the time, and I defend the industry. Originally, I trained as a development economist, and what I love about my industry, we transform regions. We go to remote areas, and once a project is well done, that area is never the same again. There are schools, there are hospitals, there are roads, there is infrastructure. And this is it's been the history of mining. So, to sum up, we need to be clear and consistent about our goals and deal with issues. The IFC, for example, will no longer finance wet tailing projects with wet tailings, because there's no tailings dam, there's no tailings dam that will face. And it's the same conundrum in Colombia. There's a big debate about open pit mining. No large open pit mining in Colombia will be easily permitted, and who knows when the next one will come up. So we're going to go underground, and we are finding as we go around the world that it's much easier. It's more expensive, perhaps, but there's no other way of doing it.
Mm-hmm. Cory, I want to bring that same question to you. How are we doing, and are we maybe not getting enough credit for the things that we are doing well versus the things that we don't do so well?
I think we have to move faster. I think we have to be more agile. I think that we are making some progress, and if we don't get credit for that progress, a lot of times it's because as an industry, we're not fond of talking about ourselves. We prefer to stay below the radar. But I was having a conversation prior to the event getting started today, and more than 30 years ago, to much fanfare, we developed the first all-electric mine in North America in Sudbury. And that was heralding the start of a new future. And now we're still, 30 years later, heralding that same start to a new future. We had Jean Chrétien in the Garson Arena 20 years ago, teleoperating a scoop miles away underground. And yet, you know, that traction never took. And so, you know, we find ourselves on that precipice again. So I think we need to be more agile. We've heard some talk about tailings dams. We have an operation in a UNESCO World Heritage Site in New Caledonia where we're piloting dry stacking of our tailings there because it's a new application of a technology that's been used before, but never for this type of ore. But it's the only way that we'll be able to continue to operate there. And I think that sense of urgency wanes with the price of the commodity that we're involved in, and we can't allow it to. You know, there was something that went across the screen about you know, costs, and really we're price takers. We don't pass the costs on to consumers. So it's really about making sure that we put this way of operating into our business model. When we're planning new projects, we should be looking at you know, are we using the best available technology to deliver the best environmental performance, to deliver the safest output, and to deliver the best productivity? I think that it's all tied together. And so are we doing some good things? Yeah, we are. We just recently, a couple of weeks ago, marked the completion of a $1 billion investment in Sudbury that is reducing emissions to 1% of what they were when the superstack was built back in 1972, to the point that we no longer need the superstack. It's just too expensive to operate. And so that's really phenomenal to think of, that we would have to operate at current emissions for 100 years to get back to the level of emissions we had in a single year back in 1972. So we're making huge progress. I just don't think that it's fast enough, and I think we need to keep that sort of in the back of our minds and challenge ourselves to move more quickly.
And in terms of things not being fast enough, what are some things that are slowing us down, do you think?
Well, you know, you heard George talk about some of the complacency that can set in when there's no burning platform, when there's nobody pushing metal away. And I believe that there are a number of burning platforms out there. Resource nationalism, you know, there's pushes for substitution, things of these sorts. And if we want to secure that long-term future, I think it's all about changing our mindset. And it's not about, you know, the price always going higher, because during the last super cycle, when the nickel price went to $50,000 a ton, that led to the introduction of nickel pig iron, which really damaged our industry. So it's about making sure that we're competitive in the current market environment that exists.
Mm-hmm. I want to bring the same question to Carl, because I can tell that you're just dying to say something over there. Before I get to Nathan and John eventually, and Jason as well.
So again, you have to ask the question, and you started off about asking outside versus inside. If you look outside the industry, again, Apple's 2016 environmental sustainability report said no more mining. So outside, if you talk to a 25-year-old in the street, they say, really, you still do that? Like, why? So outside, the image of mining in general and what we're doing in general, probably we suck, right? If you go inside, I would lean on what Cory said. There's some cool things going on. We just don't promote it. You know, we're moving, even though it was done 30 years ago, battery electric vehicles, a lot of work going on. We've got, you know, Goldcorp's, you know, 20% reduction in water towards their water. There's a lot of interesting things going on, but it's not enough and it's not fast enough. Like severely not fast enough, and there's a couple of comments based on that. Again, if Apple is saying no more mining, what would happen? Just think about what would happen if the automotive industry said, we will no longer source materials from a mine that can be traced back to a mine that produces tailings. Like that sort of, you've talked about not funding a mining project if it's wet tailings. What if an entire industry would not buy products if there were tailings, period? That sort of thinking is actually going on right now. Those conversations are going on. So, and leaning on what Cory said and a little bit of what George has said as well, is about a paradigm shift. Like, we have to take a look at mining differently. We tend to assume the same common paradigms. Thou shalt produce tailings, thou shalt produce waste rock. We have to drill and blast. We have to build, you know, we have to sink shafts, et cetera. So we have to have a world-class asset that is contiguous. We have to build massive infrastructure. Our projects have to be $9 billion over 20 years, et cetera, et cetera. We have to change that paradigm and change the design principles such that it is, we will no longer produce waste rock. We will no longer produce tailings. We will no longer need to discharge water. We will recycle as much energy as possible. You know, up to 50% of the energy we use is gone. in terms of low-grade waste heat. So we have to change the design, change the paradigms and the design principles, and do this in similar methodologies that other industries use globally, like Uber and organizations like that. So.
It seems like kind of a lot of what you're saying comes back to the idea, like George also mentioned, that really people are behind driving these changes, right? If people accept a certain way of thinking or change the way of thinking, that translates. It's not about the tech necessarily. It's about how people look at it and how they want to implement it. That's an idea that I want to get back to later, but first I want to go to Nathan and then down to John as well. From your experience with, what have you seen that we're doing well that maybe we're not getting enough credit for?
Okay. Well, first of all, I speak at a lot of events and a lot of student events. And honestly, the first question you get from 20-year-olds is, mining, do we still do that? And the second one is they really think we're on mules and pickaxes. Yeah. They honestly think that's the industry. Yeah. So, I personally think of a big truck as a big mule. So the way I look at it is we're putting a sensor on the truck to see if the tire pressure is right, and we're putting it to see if the mule is happy and fed properly, and we're putting drones to see if it's going away. So we're putting all the sensors, but at the end of the day, it's like if you're driving down the road going in the wrong direction, you're just getting there faster by putting all these sensors on it. And that's how I look at it. So we're not improving. George said we're making it bigger. We certainly are. So the general public, and especially the students, when they see, and I hear this all the time, they've all seen the Apple says no more mining, and if Apple says it, then mining must be bad. That's the general consensus.
Right.
So, and you don't see a lot of demonstrations in downtown Toronto or Lima. It's like, hey, we want more mines. It's like no cyanide, no mining, no tailings dams.
Yeah.
You see those. So that's probably another good indicator. So I don't think we get credit for the things we are doing right, because people in general don't know about them.
Right.
And all they think about the industry is like, well, we do it to ourselves. The ball mill was invented in 1850. Flotation cell was patented in 1902. So, there's not a lot of new stuff coming out of these areas. So until we involve them and try to improve something, we don't get credit for the things we do right, or the things that we think we're doing right.
Is there anything at McEwen that you want to talk about, and kind of highlight for us in terms of leading innovation in these kinds of ways?
Well, first of all, there's no shortage of good ideas. That's a myth. Yeah. And a second myth is that a lot of these technologies are expensive, which is not true. So if you're not familiar, at McEwen Mining, we have these innovation lunch and learns. We hold them every second month or so, and we invite people, usually from outside of mining, and we're not trying to promote a product, it's an idea. So, and we tape them, we put them on the CIM website. If you Google McEwen Mining Lunch and Learn, there's about 40 of them. And some of these are really, really good ideas. So I think, as George said, it's not the shortage of ideas, it's not the cost, it's the implementation. It's, everybody wants to be the first to be second. Nobody wants to be that first person trying these ideas, and some of them are really good. So yes, we do, we're a small company, but we've implemented many of the ones that we've showcased on our Lunch and Learns. And I talk about some of them at some of the events I go to. So yeah, there are lots of great ideas out there. But the problem with mining is, if you talk to most companies, they spend 70% of their money on core, about 20% on this adjacent, and about 10% in this, outside the box. And mining's more like 95, 5, and 0.001. So yeah, we might spend money on R&D. And what mining considers R&D is exploration and 43-101s. That's not R&D, but it gets lumped into that for tax purposes. But our real focus is the core. How do I get 1% better tire wear? How do I get the ball mill to go from 5 to 6% efficient? That's what we spend our money on. So yeah, there's money spent there, not nearly as much as should be, but it's all core, adjacent, and virtually zero in the innovation side.
And sorry, just on for those of you that don't know, the 70-20-10 is basically the investment criteria that virtually every other industry uses for innovation. It was developed by Eric Schmidt from Google. So
it seems there needs to be a fundamental rethinking of the way we're planning, our mines and our operations from the ground up before we even get started.
Well, R&D and innovation are not the same word, and people in mining tend to use those
Right.
interchangeably.
Right.
And all the money we do spend tends to be more on the tinkering R&D side, not in what I would call innovation.
Absolutely. John, I want to go to you next.
Sure. You were asking about a 25-year-old's perspective of clean mining. And I recall a conversation that I had recently in the Ministry of Transportation here, and Goldcorp was considering deploying a hydrogen truck fleet in Northern Ontario, and the director of policy, who would have been about 25, urbanite, sort of turned to me and he's like, "Well, you're a gold company. What do you care?" And I felt like telling him, or I did say to him, "Well, I'm human, so I do care." So that was the answer. But I think the answer really is the defensiveness of the mining industry in terms of its apologeticness, and we need, the world needs minerals, and we're important to Canada because of X, Y, and Z. That defensiveness is very weak, I think. And I think our experience is such that, action and designing mines and deploying innovation and clean technologies have put us on the front foot of that. And that type of dialogue then has changed to where, in the case of Borden, our all-electric underground mine in Northern Ontario, we've had workers who have left that have actually come back to the mine because the air quality is so much superior in an all-electric underground mine versus a dieselized environment. So I think really taking action and putting some of these things into practice is probably a great way to turn the page on some of this.
Definitely, and I think one of the key ideas that we keep coming back to that George mentioned, like I said, is that really people are the motivating factor behind a lot of this. People can be drivers in a lot of different ways. So I'm going to start with Jason, but feel free to jump in, anybody. Who do you think we're going to see driving innovation in this field down the line? Is it going to come from consumers or from regulators or from maybe the people in charge of these companies? Where does that come from?
I think it could be both the customers and regulatory, but there's also one of the things that's really encouraging about this industry when you start to look at remote facilities and energy. There's often cost savings now to implementing wind and solar and/or energy storage. So it's not necessarily a sacrifice that's going to need to be made due to a regulatory oversight or customer demand. But I do think that definitely we know in the long run, regulations are going to be a huge factor.
Definitely. Raziel, the same question to you.
I think the industry has to lead a change. One of my responses is, look at mining as the airline industry. Which component of your industry do you want to neglect? Pilot training, maintenance, food aboard? And the answer in mining, in a good mining company, you neglect none. You try to do your best all the time. I'm involved now with Whittle Consulting. We optimize mining operations. And I got involved with them because it puzzled me as a guy in the mining industry. It's so hard to get to build a mine. Finally, you get to build a mine. And when you build a mine, you don't squeeze every bit of value out of it. And partly it's historical reasons. And there are very good reasons why people don't want to change in mining. The guy's been running a mine for 30 years. MBA guy from the C-suite comes and tells him, and they say, "What do you know about mining?" "I've been doing it for 30 years. Take a hike." And we work in silos within a company, within a mine, or within a mining operation, and we need to break the silos. And I think it's up to us. When I travel, I marvel at the airline industry, how it works, how millions of people in Colombia. Colombia is a very hilly country. There's people, it's like taking Greyhound buses. In the morning, you go in Bogota in the morning to fly to Medellin, and you come back. It's amazing. Hundreds of thousands of people get up in the morning, go to the airport, and then come back in the evening home. And they sit on a sofa, they go there, and they come back, and it works. It works every day perfectly. People don't die. And this is a standard that I think we should aim to do in industry. And we're getting there. When somebody dies in a mining operation anywhere in the world, the company reports it. One person died, or a subcontractor had an issue, or somebody died. It wasn't like that 30 years ago. We've made a huge progress. And if we can convey this, do we still mine? We need to go out and give examples, such as I wasn't aware we started electrification 30 years ago, for example. Completely unaware, and I'm in the industry. And I know about your mine. Right. But We are in the verge of an enormous revolution in our industry. Forget about 250 years from now. 20 years from now, I'm a lawyer, it'll be illegal to have humans operating in a diesel polluted environment underground. It's as simple as that. You will not allow people, you can wash your hands and face at the end of a shift, you cannot wash your lungs. It is not right to let people go into, but we cannot do it right now because we don't have the technology. But companies are doing it now, and it's going to happen. In Sweden, in Boliden, kids have been operating remotely for what, 20 years now? And a very old mine, right? It's happening. So we need to be proactive. We should do like in Alberta, the tar sands industry. We need to get a message that those of us who devote our lives to this industry care deeply about the environment. I did a master's in environmental studies in the Amazon basin last century. Okay, I care about the environment. I have children, most of us have children or friends. We look at them in the eye and we are proud of what we do. We're not bad guys. We should not react defensively, we should react proactively, we should be very proud of what we do. Without us, there is no progress. One note I made here, cheap iron ore allows for progress. Cheap copper allows for electrification. Innovation in processing lithium or cobalt and whatnot brings progress. And each of those lines requires thousands of people working, hundreds of specializations, all working in harmony to allow for this to happen. But yet, when we present ourselves to the public, is the mule and pickaxe, right? We don't show people how sophisticated we are, how many PhDs and scientists we hire, how many universities research we drive, and so on. And we should be proud, and we should go out, and we should not be afraid of speaking up.
So it seems to me that what you're saying is that to some extent the onus needs to be on leaders in the industry to take up that mantle and to carry it forward. I want to go to Carl and then Cory. What are your thoughts on that?
I'll just get two quick points.
Go for it, yeah.
I would rank it as the consumer first will drive change, government second, third, someone outside the industry like Netflix or Uber, and fourth, the people in this room. And the other one with clean energy, we're a small company, like our life of mines are like 6 years, 7 years. So people come about wind and solar and they're all excited until they hear it's a 6-year mine life and they're not interested. But that's changing. Like now people will come in with solar panels and take them away and move them in 6 years. Or they'll bring in a nuclear reactor the size of a fridge and take it away in 6 years. So, you know, it's not like we have 100-year mine lives, you know, like in Sudbury. Ours are small scale and people just can't make money on a project like that.
Right. Now I'm curious about the order you had there. You had the 1, 2, 3. Why was that the order that you chose?
Driving change?
Yeah.
Because the people in this room like ball mills and trucks. And so I think, you know, when people, it's like Carl said, you know, people, or Ford will say, no, we don't want metal from, just like with blood diamonds, you know, which changed the industry. So you can use blockchain to see where our gold is, to see which gold coin that went into. Did it come from, you know, in the Congo and some guy with mercury, or did it come from a mine without cyanide use? You know, so that'll drive it. If I think one of your questions, will people pay money for green gold? Or the question is, will companies like Ford pay money from non-tailings, non-whatever metal?
Yep.
So I think it'll come from consumers, you know, that area there. I think get left to our own devices, we're quite happy with ball mills.
Carl, do you agree with Nathan? Do you disagree?
Yeah, I agree, but I'll put a different spin on it. But first of all, we don't just like trucks, we like big trucks. I got a 400 ton. How big is yours?
You know who likes big trucks? 10-year-old boys and mining engineers.
Yeah, exactly.
That's it. Yeah. Every time you open up something, there's a big truck.
It's a big truck. How can we make it bigger, right?
Yeah, how can we make it? Yeah, if you're going for a 10-to-1 waste ratio at 0.5 grams per ton, obviously you need a bigger truck. Yeah. There's no other way to do it.
And that comes back to what I said before, the paradigm shift. You have to basically ask yourself, do you need the big truck at all? Do you need trucks? But to answer your question about the who's going to drive this, realistically, similar to Nathan, but if the companies don't do it, then it will be forced on us, period, end of story. And again, just with Apple coming up with this no more mining, it's actually triggered a lot of people taking a look outside the business and going, hey, those are my stakeholders now. We have to look at our stakeholders. So if we don't do it, we'll be forced. And those companies that do not do it will end up being out of business, period.
And Cory?
Yeah, John mentioned earlier the word partnership, and I think that there's lots of players who can play a role in this pursuit of change, and I think that supply community has a role to play, OEMs, the research and innovation community, and government communities, the industry itself. I do agree that the pressure to change is going to come from society. I think if you take the timeline that George put up, where he talked about 1750, 1500, and 2005 or whatever it was, you can shorten that. What's acceptable 20 years ago is not acceptable today, and what's acceptable today probably won't be acceptable in 5 years. So we have to be prepared to change, and I think that we have to be in that continuous change mindset. Change is not something that you've ever fully accomplished. There's no finish line. We have to continue to pursue it. I can remember when I met my wife, I was a newspaper reporter, and her father was a retired 30-year worker at the smelter in Sudbury. And to him, I was just a paper boy. It meant nothing. I never joined the family until I joined the mining industry. And then in the early stages of our emission reduction effort, what we called the SOAP project, the SO2 abatement project, you should have heard this guy. He was saying, well, they're a bunch of babies. He says, when I worked there, the air was blue and men were men. And that was the attitude. That attitude doesn't exist anymore. It's changed, and we have to change along with it.
Definitely, times are definitely changing. Now, I want to look towards the future of clean mining, and I know, John, you guys have done a lot of great work over there with Goldcorp in that regard. So I'll start with you. What does the future of clean mining look like?
I was gonna mention something on your previous question about kind of where the change is going to come from. So yeah, I think that the leadership and vision of the current suite of major companies, I think a lot of that change can come from those leaders and that vision. And what I would say is, in terms of Goldcorp's vision, we have our Towards Zero Water initiative, where we believe that water is a precious resource, and that putting price on water and understanding ways in which we can reduce our water. So our moonshot objective is to reduce our fresh water consumption by 80%. And I think that then further gets to the second sort of big influencers on this area, which will be investors. And the market, of course, reacts to short-term type investments and other types of activities within. So as soon as if the market starts to put value on clean mining and innovation and technology and companies who do adopt and are essentially taking responsibility in that way, then I think that will have a big and ultimate massive impact on the industry, as we all very much react to market signals. So.
Now, we are running out of time, but I want to go to Jason and then Nathan real quick. Same question to you guys. What does the future of clean mining look like?
Well, from the energy perspective, it's great. We can already see that renewables are making their way into diesel cost reductions, and you're seeing people playing around with microgrids that use lithium batteries, because lithium's cheap, and there's a lot of it around today. In the future, though, you're never going to remove the emissions on your electricity generation until you get something that can hold many hours or days or weeks worth of electricity. And so technologies like our zinc reactor and some of the other technology companies you're going to see this afternoon may be able to help with how do you move to 100% renewable electricity generation off-grid.
So I have a whole list. I'll pick one. In situ recovery. No ball mills, no trucks, no tails. If in my lifetime I could ban one of those three, I'll be happy. If I ban all three, that's even better. So in situ recovery.
You really hate ball mills.
Yeah. I hate all of those.
And do we have time for a quick question from the audience, or?
Yeah, why don't we do one? We have time for one question from the audience, and why don't we do one from Twitter as well? Richard, you just pick which one you like the best. Michael's got a microphone here. Anyone from the audience?
Well, while we're waiting, can I throw something out there? We talk a lot about the what. We don't talk about the how. And George teed it up earlier, and I'll be done before Linda gets the mic. And that is, we have to look outside of our industry and see how other industries innovate, and other industries look at things like platforms. What are the platforms that are causing us problems? We need to tackle the platforms. Get rid of trucks, get rid of tailings. We've got to look outside our industry and adopt those hows and the methodologies they use to innovate and accelerate innovation. Sorry, Linda, it was 3 seconds over.
Or turn the tailings into bricks or something
exactly.
useful.
Exactly.
I thank the panel for their insight. And my suggestion, because I've been a little bit rabble-rousing earlier this morning, is it would be nice to have a woman on the panel. I think a little bit more diversity would be very useful in the discussion about innovation. One of the pieces that hasn't really been identified here is the human resources. Yeah. So you talked about there is some money to do this kind of work. There are lots of ideas. They're not people in place who are taking the rein to try and advance these concepts and implement them. And a little bit more diversity might really help. Thank you.
Can I answer that one?
Go ahead.
Linda, a few years ago, I wrote an article in Northern Mining. It's called, Is Mining Innovation an Oxymoron? And the answer is yes. So first of all, you're right. Out of all the personality types in the world, engineering and mining only takes half of them. Okay? The innovators, we do not attract innovators into the industry. There's a paper on that. I can send anyone a link. Women is about 17% of the industry, so we've left half the population. We've left, yeah, maybe not even in this room. Yeah. And then minorities, we totally ignore them. So out of the 7 billion people in the planet, we take about 8% of them who all think alike in general. Nobody thinks like I do, but in general, 8% of them think exactly the same. So that's a big point. It's not just the women, gender one. It's diversity of thought is not in mining.
Yeah. I didn't want to comment on the rest of the
Does anybody else want to jump in on that question? Or?
Well, part of it too, the human side too, is we tend to look at mining schools and our existing disciplines. Why are we not talking to students outside of our disciplines to bring that new thought leadership to the table, right? Like, how many people here are not from the mining business, right? Like, very few. Yeah.
I got one.
There's a couple. Like, we're talking to mining, about mining, with mining, for mining. We do not look outside. If you talk to a psychologist, some of the best media companies, social and gaming companies were built by English majors and psychologists. We don't talk to people like that. We want a mining engineer, we want a civil engineer, we want an environmental engineer. We don't go outside of our disciplines.
I mean, in a process-driven industry, it's very easy to put in a screen for diversity and inclusion, right? I mean, so that just make it part of your human resources process, make it part of your process, for picking these panelists, for example. So I think if in a process-driven industry, let's just put it in the process.
Linda, I have a saying, if you want to welcome people to the industry, be welcoming.
Just another point on that, though, is it's not just your HR processes. It's really about how we portray ourselves as an industry. There's a reason we're not attracting the types of people that you say we're not attracting. I don't know if it's still up, but when you go to the Sudbury Airport, there's an ad, and it shows a person with a hard hat on and dirt all over their face. And it's an old, archaic portrayal of mining. We need some pretty high-tech skills now if we're going to move to the next generation of mining. And so we can do a better job developing that narrative for men and for women and invite them into this industry in a better, more effective way than we are today.
Is she riding a mule in that ad?
And on that note, I think that'll do it for our Clean Mining panel. Unfortunately, we're out of time. A big round of applause, please, for our lovely panelists. Thank you so much, guys.